Hi everyone, my name is Peck. This is my poster. It's a poster presenting some of the results of my research that I've been doing here at Creighton. I have an abstract which I have outlined, but you can pause that if you'd like to read over it, since I'm going to outline most of what it says right now for you. My experiment is taking place, had taken place, I suppose, at ALICE in Geneva, Switzerland. This is an overview picture of the Large Hadron Collider, the LHC, and I'm using ALICE, the detector, where particles collide at basically the speed of light here in the center. And here's a little wire diagram of what that interaction looks like. I've got two charged particles that are whizzing towards each other, and they're separated by this impact parameter B. And that collision could be a central collision where B is pretty small and the particles just collide right into each other. Could be more of a central collision where they sort of have a glancing collision, but I'm interested in the cases where it's an ultra-peripheral collision. That separation is actually larger than their diameters and the particles just whiz by each other. And sometimes this process leads to the photoproduction of an A to C meson. And that's essentially what my research question is. Can I find any evidence that these A to C mesons were produced? If we look at exactly how I did that, I've got a list of some of the decay, well, all of the decay channels that I looked at, which are just a small number of all of the possible decay channels that the A to C can go to. However, what's special about the decay channels that I've been analyzing are that all the daughter particles are charged. I've taken all of the lead-on-lead collision data from 2018 and I analyzed all of it, and I selected events through various stages of my analysis, basically to try to narrow down the events which match one of these decay channels. Most of these initial these initial selections are to get down to the events that have basically the right number of particles and readily identifiable particles. Then the real work is identifying those particles and then identifying if they belong to those decay channels. That is based on the beta block energy deposition formula, which we use for the particle identification. And in this case, I only need to identify kaons and pions based on the channels that I have. And so what I have here is a representation of my estimates for whether particles are kaons or pions based on this beta block energy deposition formula. The particles that are near the zero on the x-axis that are in this blue box are likely to be kaons, and the particles that are near zero on the y-axis are likely to be pions, the yellow box. And then in this red region are some electron contamination, which you can see could be, sometimes it intersects both of these lines. And there's a small amount of contamination that actually is in this green box, which could be either a kaon or a pion. But basically, I try to use these boxes to try to identify what is a kaon and what is a pion, and then assign them back to their appropriate decay channel. The other important step to calculate, though, is is actually done by simulation, and that is through, and this is the idea of the acceptance, or the probability that I'm going to actually observe all of these daughter particles in my detector. That's done by simulation, by simulating the, most important, we simulate the parent particle, which then decays into its various daughter particles, and then since it's fully simulated, we know the kinematic properties of the parents and the daughters, and we can look at those cases where the daughter particles have the correct transverse momentum, that is a transverse momentum high enough to actually reach the inner barrel of our detector, and also have a low enough pseudo-rapidity, which is basically just the angle that they come out of. That angle needs to be close to 90 degrees, close to zero pseudo-rapidity, in order to actually strike our detector. And so, and all those events where all of the particles are inside those green regions end up being accepted. And so on the far right here is a plot of, just for one of the decay channels, this blue line indicates the million events that I simulated in total, and this red line indicates just the ones where all of its daughter particles made it into these green regions. And so you can see that for this particular channel, the acceptance ends up being around 6.1%, and all of the decay channels end up being right around that single-digit percentile range. Ultimately, we take all of the events that were in this bin of my analysis, which are all of the events which match one of the A to C's decay channels, and I take a plot of the transverse momentum on the y-axis and the invariant mass on the x-axis for, again, all of those which look like they match one of the A to C's decay channels. Then, and essentially, what I'm interested in is the segment of this graph which is right at the A to C mass, but also has the transverse momentum that I expect for that photoproduction process. You can see that there's two distinct blobs in this graph, one of which is above around 0.11 GeV and one of which is below. And it's that region that's below that corresponds to coherent photoproduction, and these are going to basically be coherent photons that are going to produce the A to C. And so we know that, and so looking at just the photons below 0.11, we see this distribution in the mass. And zooming in a bit, this large peak over here is due to the excited rho particle. But in our region of interest, we can zoom in a little bit further and fit an exponential decay to the background noise. And when we do that, we can actually see that there is one bin that's clearly above this background noise, and that corresponds exactly with the J psi mass. And that is statistically significant. If we look at this bottom plot, is just the difference between, if we subtract off this exponential, we can see that there are 17 excess events in this J psi bin with a statistical significance of more than 3 sigma, since the error is only about 5.2. However, these 3 bins over here correspond to about plus or minus 1.5 widths of the A to C, and in total, those barely have more than, and they barely have any excess events over the error. Only about 10 events over the background noise with an error of 7. So definitely not significant. And so I'm fairly confident that my reconstruction is working correctly, since I have indeed reconstructed a J psi peak, which we do expect to be there. However, we actually expected there to be a detectable A to C signal based on some of the previous research done by Barak Gruberg a few years ago, where based on the data in 2015, we expected the 2018 lead-on-lead collision, which is at a higher energy, to produce enough, to have a high enough A to C yield to actually be detectable. However, it looks like we were not, at least in these decay channels, we were not able to discover that. And just to sum that up, basically, we do see that expected J psi peak, but there's no significant signal for the A to C, which is, again, unexpected based on what we've previously calculated. And however, the acceptance numbers that were calculated, shown just here, actually also do not agree with some of the previous ones estimated. However, that was done using a slightly different methodology, although it's not clear if the difference in methodology is enough to reconcile the difference in those answers. So even though it seemed, and so there definitely seem to be just some discrepancies with what we've expected to see in the past compared to what we're now seeing in the 2018 data. I'd like to give a thanks to my advisor, Dr. Seeger, and as well to the U.S. Department of Energy, which partially funds this research.